Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. We're a global community of yoga therapists and related professionals who are sharing our knowledge and experience with one another to make the world a better place for all of us to thrive. On this podcast, we have deep and thought-provoking conversations that we hope will nourish you and make you feel more connected to yourself and to others. Feel free to continue these conversations on our private Facebook group called Yoga Therapy Hour Podcast with Amy Wheeler, and listen at the end of the podcast each week as we'll be giving away a special gift. Remember, we have a mobile app coming out May 2nd, 2022 that tracks mental health and so much more using the foundations of yoga and Ayurveda. Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler. And today I get to talk to a wonderful woman who I just admire so much. She's doesn't know this, but she's one of my favorite people in yoga. I trust her with my heart completely, even though we haven't spent a lot of time together. I think sometimes we meet people that you can just somatically feel they're safe and you can be yourself, and whatever comes up will be welcome into the relationship. And that's how I feel with Ann Pitman, who is the director of the School of Embodied Yoga Therapy in Ottowa, Canada. And Anne has a really interesting background. She's got a master's degree in kinesiology and has been experiencing the rhythms of the body for over 35 years. She has weekly classes, one-on-one yoga therapy. She runs a yoga therapy school. She's recently written a book on cancer published by Handspring, and it will be released soon, I think. We're going to talk about that in the interview. And what we will talk about today with Anne is death and dying and how that kind of merges with yoga therapy. And Anne has a beautiful way of explaining death and dying and how we view death and dying. And I'm going to let her talk about that because I think she's the expert and she's the acharya. And I also want to say that during these very difficult COVID times, I think death and dying has actually kind of come to the forefront for many of us to take a look at. And maybe as difficult as it is and as sad as it is, it may be the first time in my life that I have seen people wrestling with their own death, their own mortality, and what does that mean for my life here and now? And do I want to change jobs? Do I want to move to a different state? Am I with the right person or the wrong person in my relationship? Am I willing to take risks? Am I needing to do less? When we start to realize that any of us could go at any time unexpectedly, it really kind of sharpens your focus about who you are, why you're here, what do you want to do with this precious life, and most importantly, how do you want to experience your days? So, this is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about for the last 3 years. When my mother died unexpectedly of heart failure, I really assumed she would be around until her 90s. She was a tough little mama. And when she passed away 20 years early, in my opinion, I was in shock. I had regrets about how much time I didn't spend with her because of my busy travel schedule as the IAYT president during that time. And it really caused me to rethink my life and what I'm doing here. And as hard as it was to lose her, I have to say that I have successfully reorganized my life. Even coronavirus helped that, the COVID helped that. But I think the start of it for me was a reorganization around who do I want to spend my time with? How do I want to feel every day in my body, in my mind, in my heart? Can I not abandon myself? Right? There's so many times prior to my mom's death that I just went along with the program and tried to be the nice one and tried to make everybody happy as a people pleaser, abandoning myself. And after my mom's death, I was like, life is short. I will no longer abandon myself. And it's taken a couple of years to work that through my marriage, my business, my friendships. But I think the baking of that inside Amy Wheeler has come to full fruition. And that's not to say that I desire to be selfish or only think of myself. I desire to live my values, which is to take care of people in a way that I can also take care of myself. Whereas before, it was all about them and nothing about me. So there was a rebalancing. And I think some people need to rebalance the other way, right? That they need to be more selfless. But the idea is that through the contemplation of our death, of ourselves and our loved ones, that there could be a restructuring of the life that we're living and to create space and time for that to happen. So that's what I've been working on the last few years and why I'm really interested in what Anne has to say in this interview, because I do consider her an expert. She's been studying this deeply for 12 years with teachers, specifically teachers who are teaching her and others about death and dying. And I think we all have a lot to learn from this interview. It may not be one that we're so excited about, but I can tell you I came out of the interview feeling lighter. So that says something, lighter and stronger. So I introduce you to Anne, and I really hope you enjoy this hour together. Welcome, Anne. It's so nice to have you here. And I feel like we're getting to have tea together this morning, and so happy that, have another director of a yoga therapy school on the program. You are the director of the School of Embodied Yoga Therapy in Ottowa, Canada. So welcome. So nice to have you here.
Oh, it's beautiful to see your shining face. It's been a long time.
I know. I have to start this with saying, I wonder if we're the only two yoga therapists that were also sports psychologists in a previous life.
I know. I love that connection. It's so interesting, isn't it? As I listen to you week by week, I find that we do have quite a few similarities in background and approach. It's really interesting to me. Yeah. So that's one of them. Yeah. Coming from sports psychology.
I feel the same about you. I was walking the dogs this morning with my husband, and he said, "Who are you interviewing?" And I said, "Oh, this lovely lady. I feel like she's a soul sister." So it's nice to have you here. Thanks for coming and making time.
Such a pleasure. I find myself in a bright morning here in Ottawa, and it's minus 31 Celsius. We're in a deep freeze. We're in a deep lockdown, and it's just lovely to spend some time with you.
All I can say is I'm sorry. Some people love that. They're like bathing in the ice, ice ponds. I'm like, no. My Viking heritage is not, doesn't like that kind of cold. Have you always lived in Canada?
I have always lived in Canada, yeah. And, of course, it's quite variable, but Ottawa, which is the capital, is one of the coldest capitals in the world. It's also really hot in the summer. So we've got huge variety, and it brings lots of joy and movement with regard to what you can get to. And my current enjoyment is fat biking on the snow. So,
what biking?
Fat biking. So
spell that for me.
FAT, fat biking. It's massive tires. So I just bike all during the winter as well. It's wonderful.
And you just put on a big snowsuit and
yeah, you got to have all the clothing. It's all about wool.
Okay. Wow. I'll
It's
come visit
wonderful.
you in the summer. How's that sound?
Ah, no.
Well, I found it interesting this morning. I was scrolling through Twitter. I just got on Twitter. If anybody wants to join me on Twitter, I'd love to be your friend because I have no friends. But the NAP
Aw.
the NAP ministry put out, this culture has a very clear disconnect around death.
Mm.
I thought, how appropriate for our conversation today. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Oh,
That our culture has a disconnect around death.
well, I might go further. I might say that there's a deep fearfulness or a death phobia that's entrenched here. I'm thinking it's the same in the United States as it is in Canada, and that's what we come to when we're working with people who are coming to their ending of days. That's what they're into, and it's really challenging. It's a really challenging place to die.
Can you tell me how you got interested in helping people prepare for death?
You know, I think I've always been interested in death, even as a kid, and it's funny, there's a real overlap with yoga here, of course. But my very first yoga class I went to many decades ago, the teacher, bless her heart, Joy, at the end of the class said, okay, it's time to die. And, this was all new to me. I thought, gosh, really, there's a practice that insists that you bring this in, that you get close to this idea of death. And so that really, I think, it was so entrancing to me that there was such a practice that could include death. And so this came and continued in my interest. People died around me, actually. That's what my initial capacity to see that I didn't know anything about it. And it was really quite hidden from me. And I needed to get with this to be of any kind of service to my friends, my family, and my clients. And as I started to work in this, and I do work in cancer, so sometimes it's a matter of continuing with someone who has been going through cancer treatment and they are coming to their time of dying. And I think that's how it began, really, is just continuing on with them as they wanted me to. I started to study and do some scholarship around this, and I've been studying for 12 years at a school called the Orphan Wisdom School, which is run by Stephen Jenkinson, who is you could say, he's an activist with regard to death and dying in this culture. And when we're there, we're studying, how it could be that we've come to this place where we don't know death, or we don't see it. We don't have a place for it at the table. We don't see it in our daily life. We don't honor endings, and we really don't have a shared understanding, as some cultures might, with regard to what death is, how it feeds life, in fact, and how we could accompany people as they're coming to the ending of days.
Do you have any thoughts on why we don't have a shared understanding of death and why we don't usually look at it until we're forced to? You've been studying 12 years. I need to know.
Great place. It's a really great place to wonder. It surely is. And, I think that there's so much stitched into this, and almost like we're a fish in water. It's hard for us to see it, because it is so normalized here. And, you could speak about even colonization. What effect did colonization have on our understanding of death, or our lived experience of not having the bones of our people with us anymore? And how we might, in our culture, be more about achievement or individualization. And we may have lost the kinship of living and dying in a way that has a shared understanding together. It's something to start, pulling at these threads a little bit and wondering together. And that is something that we do. And luckily we have good companions in our colleagues to do that. And sometimes it happens with clients too, that they are in that place of wondering. But often it's a real pileup of not really not thinking that you're going to die, I would say. Like we have this idea, yes, people die, blah, blah, but it's not a lived understanding of that. And it can be an enormous shock to come
like
to.
in the moment, like, oh my God, I'm dying right now.
Well, yes, there's much that would seduce you away from even knowing that, let's say. But to, come to that, that it's interesting that it could be, a trauma. It could be a shock to learn that you're dying. And it can be a known thing, but we don't practice it. We don't see it. Really, I think it's quite new. It's only been about 50 years, I think, that we've had people who work in the death trade or mortuaries, et cetera, that we have people that we give the bodies to, that we don't see it. We're not with it. We're not with people when they're dying. Well, we're not with people when they're in birth either. So we have this, unusual experience, I'd say, in the realm of the human condition, that we're not with those things, and that we don't see them in our day. We don't see the endings in our day. We don't practice with the ending of our breath much. I suppose we proceed as though we'll always be here, or that we misunderstand our impermanence. And this, of course, folds so well into the beauty of yoga philosophy too, with regard to what can we be aware of, and how can we titrate that awareness with folks when it's time and when it's available.
So, this is your area of focus, the death care. Can you tell us how you help people prepare for death?
Honestly, I would say it's, in a way, I'm working with many different areas at the same time, let's say. So I would say that we could all be working in that area, really, with regard to, our awareness of life and death, and people who are, very far away. Let's say they have a sense that they're very far away from dying. This is so cultural. I'm not sure that every culture has that sense that they are very far away from dying. So there's work with people who are in that place. There's work with people who are diagnosed. I do work at a cancer center, and so working with people who are diagnosed, and sometimes that is what keeps them up at night. This sense of, am I dying? What happens if I die? And often, this is going to sound very strange, but it's kind of like watching an ocean liner turn. It's a very slow experience, and it's very much a waiting for this to arrive, because we don't allow for it. We have many people around us, let's say, or our culture around us saying, don't look at it, that's very morbid, or think positive, and so these things this all comes into play as we're working with people who are coming to the ending of their days. And it really does make it harder on them.
Would you say, for at least the family members, is after all that waiting, is there some time of relief that, okay, it's over, it's done, now we can move on? Because I'm imagining waiting, sometimes 1 week, 3 weeks, 6 months.
Oh, do you mean, is there a relief when someone dies? Is that what you mean?
Well, do you find that the people surrounding them have some relief that they can stop waiting now?
Yeah, I think so. That's a possibility. I'm going to say it depends on how people die.
Right.
It's going to sound strange, but if the dying itself comes from a place of terror, or an unwillingness, and this is what is witnessed by family and children, etc., then sometimes there isn't that kind of relief. Yeah.
Would you say that each death is very individual?
Hmm. Yeah, I suppose it can be, but I wonder if it helps us to think a little bit bigger with regard to dying. And we have a way of hopefully, and keeping the patient or the client in the center of the experience. But here's kind of a radical thought: is what happens if we keep death in the center? And what does death ask of us? What does life ask of us? Maybe it's best if I go towards something that we can recognize well, which is birth. So when we prepare and for birth, which women and families do, they think about how they would like it to be. And this brings us to a real wrestle of who we are and what we can come to, and what, maybe choices, etc. And this is all grand. And then hopefully, whether it's the body orienting you to this or your philosophy or what have you, but hopefully eventually you get to a place where birth shows up, that we find we may not be in full control of such a thing, and there are great mysteries in life, and how do we bend to them too? And that we practice more of that Ishvara Pranadhana, we practice more of that surrender to what we don't control. And maybe there's some of that when we think about dying, that people can wonder about how it could be, who they'd like around them. But, it's an unknowable thing too. It's a great mystery. And so how do we also, allow for that and find some practice in surrender or yielding. Yeah.
So when I listen to you, it sounds like there's no ground to stand on. Like it sounds like we're just going to go into this thing and we're going to be present and see what happens. Like I feel like there's nothing I can grab onto from what you're saying. Is that how it is, or am I projecting that onto this situation?
Well, it's not a bad place to start, actually. It does speak to the impoverishment that we're in, that we have not attended deaths, that we have not lived our life in attendance of this, and that we have some way of learning about it through being present to people dying, to animals dying, to there's more that we can notice in our days with regard to endings and dyings. So if there hasn't been such a practice or an awareness, and you do come then to a death, your own or someone else's, it's quite a challenge that way. But I hope that you can hear in what I'm saying that perhaps it doesn't have to be that way, that there may be ways to come to this, to befriend death much before our time, and to bring some awareness to the many practices that we could come to. We even in our superpower of working with anxiety, let's say in yoga therapy, it's so important that we have that available to us as yoga therapists, as people. But if we go underneath it, often it is a fear of death. Mm-hmm. So then we start to wonder about these kleshas, and what's stirred up there. And the first one we know is awareness. And so we're talking about, yes, there is a cultural lack of awareness about death. Is there something that we can do in that place? Can we wonder a little bit altogether? Can there be some? And there is, you'll see there's lots of books being written about death right now. There's death cafes, there's death doulas. There's so much that I think this culture is coming to. Possibly, we could look at the language that we speak about when we talk about death. People hardly ever say dying. They don't say my mother died. They say I lost my mother.
She's passed
She's
away,
gone.
passed
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. We don't. So there's so much that we can come to. And I think yoga therapy is well suited to this work. And it's well suited to accompanying people in their fear and in any pain or discomfort that comes at the end of days, but in more of a sort of a cultural way that we can help our culture mature, let's say, with regard to seeing what we could practice, what we could speak to, how we could be more aware of what's happening.
What's coming?
Does that give you more ground?
Not really. As we're talking, I was checking in with my own body somatically, like, oh, how is this landing? And it's almost like I feel the vata, if you will, goes high. I'm sure there's some fear. You know, I lost my mother within the last couple of years, and I've really been working with her death. So there's this fear, and then it becomes very black and white. Like, well, we don't know what happens, so we might as well not think about it. Let's just be in the present moment and live. Right. Like I go to these opposite poles in my mind. Sure. I'll never know anyway what happened, you know, where she is, what she's doing, if there's any part of her. And I can imagine that a lot of people may feel like that, well, we don't know, so why bother? And what I hear you saying is just the opposite, which is, yes, we should explore death and preparation for death and communal discussions about death, and that actually will inform our lives too. It's not just about that moment of death.
Exactly. Well said. Yeah. There is something to know about that if we keep this so far away from our awareness and experience, what's the consequence of that in our days? And truthfully, when we do look at the research and when we do study those who are in the ending of their days, there is something that we can know about that it does inform their life. And when we look at cultures that hold death daily, even the ones who have died, they tend, you know, I don't want to romanticize this, but they do tend to have a different way of living. They see their connection to nature. They venerate aging. It's not a problem to solve. Grief has a completely different flavor. It's not just a drag and something to get over, but an important something to honor. And so all of this, you know, it's hard to pull it apart when we live in a culture that maybe doesn't have that quality at this moment anyway.
Are you familiar with Teresa Danzig, who was a yoga for amputees teacher? Yes. And you probably saw that she recently passed away from COVID. And
I did.
You know, I was talking to some yoga friends about it, and everyone's in so much shock because I think we have this idea that we do yoga, you know, we're healthy, our immune systems will carry us through. And if you got vaccinated and boosted, you're going to be just fine. And then when she passed away and she had all those things, I think some of us were like, whoa, wait a minute. This is that I think it's called vitalism, you know, that theory that I can control everything and take care of myself and it's not going to touch me. It kind of cracked us open. And I was saying to you earlier before this interview that I decided not to write a book in 2022 because if I die from COVID, I don't want my last year to be sitting in front of a computer trying to write a book. Like that's not my idea of joy.
I hear you.
We're going to talk about your book that you just finished. But I think that's what we're talking about, right? That when you seriously contemplate, like, okay, she had a TED Talk on December 15th and she was gone by middle of January. Like everything starts to shift in terms of what really matters and what am I doing here? And how do I want to feel each day of my life? Much less, how do I want to contribute? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, it's important, I think, to pause, with what you're speaking and who you're speaking about, just to bring a breath to that life that was well lived and and the grief, with regard to her death. And yeah, it's wonderful that cracks open a place of wonderment with regard to how we hold ourselves away from that. That you're speaking a little bit about how we continue to not absorb that information truly. And yet I'm hearing when you're saying, if I am going to die, okay, and it's funny, it's if I'm going to die,
should I be mortal? One eternal being, who knows?
Yes. Should I be mortal? What would that mean if I do keep that close? Does that inform my life? And you're saying yes. Maybe it does inform me at the moment of not doing something or bringing my life energy to something else instead. And how would it be to have that as a daily awareness that I will die? And we do get into difficulty with regard to wellness and what that means. And maybe it's best said this way. When I work at the cancer center, and when someone takes good care of themselves and maybe even be a yoga teacher or eats well, the greater the shock. And that's of interest, that people are more shocked because, so what's the belief underneath that? That if we do this, then that, if we take care of ourselves, then what, we won't age or no disease will come to us. What is that? It's a wonderful thing to start pulling that apart together, and in good company.
Yeah. I've had discussions with yoga teachers that basically say, if this person is so enlightened, how are they aging? How are they sick? How come they're dying? Like, it's like, whoa, time out. That's a discussion to really lean into, probably.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about Asmita a little bit, this like this false or mistakenness, false understanding perhaps. And, we are in the presence of death every day, what are we eating? You could say, oh, I'm a vegetarian. Well, it's the ending of a carrot too, is it not? And what is the ending of the day? Do we practice with the ending of the sunset, of the day coming to an end? Do we notice the ending of a breath? Do we notice the ending of our time with someone when we say goodbye to them? When I say goodbye to you today, Amy, am I saying goodbye like, oh, I'll see you next week for sure? Like, do I keep that assumption going, or do I actually say goodbye to you like, goodbye, I'm so grateful for your presence in my life. I want you to know that. And do we say goodbye like it's goodbye? There's so many practices that we could come to that heighten our awareness. And is that not yoga? Are we seeing clearly? What's the blanket on top of all of this? What could we come to? And when we think about our own fears, what's underneath those fears? And how can we turn toward that in a gentle way? It's not, I hope it's not sounding like, I'm coming to people with, okay, so you're going to die and let's get with that. It's so gentle. It's so titrated. And, in the place of human wonderment and kindness, that we accompany people. And, because it's coming for us too, is it not? How can we be with people in it?
Yeah, it's really reminded me of like the Buddhists, the bodhicitta heart, or the Christians, the Sacré-Cœur heart of Jesus, or Kuan Yin, this deep, deep compassion. And I can understand why we don't want to go there several times a day, because it's really painful and life is so heavy and hard. So how do we lighten it up and titrate it? You know what I'm saying? Like, life is so hard. I can see why we're just like, nope, I'm sorry, I can't do that, Anne. I'm going to see you next week. You know?
Well, there's usually many things going on. When I'm talking about working with a client, there's often so much to come to, with regard to what's happening in them, the side effects of treatment, perhaps. How are they going to speak to their child about this? There's a lot going on, and it's hard in the culture that we're in. I agree with you, but the more we practice with it, and the more we see that death isn't the enemy of anything, and how do we understand our death? Is it a failure to live? Is it a giving up? Like, there's so much more to understand about dying, and we can look cross-culturally with regard to this, that there are places on the earth that see the connection of death and life, and that their daily life is enhanced by honoring their ancestors, or honoring the ones that have come to them on their table. Or we practice with the seasons. We practice with, right now there's so much snow where I am, and it's not going to last. So does the fact that it's not going to last enhance its beauty? Yes, it does.
100%.
Yes, it does. And so the fact that my life is not going to last, does that enhance its beauty? Yes, it does. And it allows us to go bigger than our own personal journey, connecting us to the people who might come after, the people who have come before us. This is a human wrestle. And I would say that the wrestle is important. It's sometimes when I speak about this, it's, as you said, we can go kind of to black and white. It's like, okay, so we got to get good with this then. We got to accept it. We got to be peaceful about it. And I don't know about that. I think this is the continuation of the human wrestle. And how do we find company in it and practice in it? We can practice some of these things. And, we have some folks in our community who are doing great work in this. I'm thinking about Gary Kraskow, who's, it's got beautiful chakra sadhana. And, I'm thinking about Jennifer Collins Taylor, who did some very early writing on yoga therapy and end of life, and Uma Dinsmore Tully with regard to yoga nidra. And there's so much, there's such a richness in yoga that we can bring to the fore, whether we are just considering the fact that we may in fact be mortal, or whether we're actually working at the realization that we're coming to the ending of our days.
So would you say that ultimately yoga is to help us prepare for death, in your opinion? I mean, is that the whole point at the end of it? We're not going to lead in our marketing with that, right? We have this great yoga studio, sure? And by the way, we're going to prepare you, obviously. But do you think when it really comes down to it, when a practitioner has been doing their practice and coming into deep meditation and lying in shavasana or going into deep yoga nidra and surrendering to those experiences, is that the preparation we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think some would say that is the purpose of yoga. And what are the breadcrumb trails that yoga leads us to with regard to the many practices and awarenesses that we can bring into our life? I'm not sure, Amy. I'm not sure that that's not a
good marketing.
Really great marketing,
maybe in COVID times. I mean, that's not even trying to be silly. That's people are suffering as they're losing loved ones.
This is a great place of wondering. Has our time in the pandemic shifted anything at all with regard to what we know, how we can grieve? Does it shift anything with regard to our old ones and how, I don't know if it's true in your country, but in mine, many of the deaths have been in long-term care.
Right.
And, is this something to wonder about with regard to how we keep them in mind and keep them in our life and honor them? It's all very stitched together. And, initially I did some work in the pandemic with regard to grief and how do can we stay with this? Can we practice into that? And actually, had some great discussions with Marlisa about polyvagal theory and grief. And does grief and do these considerations that we're talking about, does it bring us into a ventral vagal place? With regard to the lack of loneliness. Otherwise, we just think that we're so lonely in this. We wake up in the middle of the night and we're like, oh my God, what does my life mean? And what if I die? But could it be shared? Could there be accompaniment in it?
Social connection through these wanderings.
Exactly. The coming out into the verandas and banging pots and serving the frontline workers and all of this. And doesn't it bring us to our humanity? Is it human making actually to consider our dying and the dying around us? Or do we insist on retreating from it? And where's the yoga in that?
Which is so interesting because when you and I were going back and forth about the questions for this interview, I was shocked to see number 8.
Oh, what is it?
A year-long course that helps yoga practitioners in their self-inquiry around dying. I was like, you're doing a year-long course to help yoga people think about dying? Tell me about that. I was just fascinated. I was like, who does a year-long course in that?
Well, I've had some great teachers in this, just to say that. And one of them also is Stephen Levine, who did a practice or a book. It's called A Year to Live. And I facilitated that for years. So it's a year-long practice, assuming that this is your last year to live. So that's pretty stirring thought. But the course that's been cooking for a while brings yoga into it. And what is that breadcrumb trail with regard to the people who have come before us and have offered yoga in the midst of this? Are there cultures where yoga is a part of the dying? And if we can, as a yoga therapist, if we can do our svadhyaya on this, if we can bring ourselves to our humanity and our mortality, does it change our presence? I think it does. And it does change our presence with regard to people who are working with their dying or afraid of dying. If we can, it's not that we get, easy with it. We're like, oh, I've really thought about it and I'm really good with my dying. No, we stay in that wrestle and we're able to get very wide in our wondering about it with someone. And as a result, we're not, let's say, triggered by someone's fear of dying or their dying or their disease, that we can get a little bit bigger with our presence around that with them. I think it's enormous. Well, perhaps I'll just say for myself, it changed everything. To continue on this road of befriending death changes my work completely in yoga therapy.
What is the biggest shift for you? I mean, I know there's probably many, many small shifts. Right? That's how we change. But is there like one thing that just like trajectory change? Well, I think, you find yourself sitting with someone who is in
as we've spoken of, in a culture of death denial. And it allows you to be in it with them, that you've done this deep consideration yourself. It's bringing a story to mind. I hope this is okay. That often I'm brought in because I work in an integrative clinic. Yeah, so I'm working with other people. I'm working with palliative folks. I'm working with doctors and nurses and naturopaths, etc. And I'm often brought in to be with someone when the news is delivered, let's say, of that their treatment is ending, or because there's such a huge anxiety for someone. But this really rings. This person came to me because they wanted to practice. They'd heard that their breath changes when they die, and they think that they are coming to the ending of their days. At least that's what the doctors are saying. And they came to me because they'd like to know more about breath at the end of their life, and what might that mean. And our practice is so much about breath. And indeed, that is what is the practice at the ending of life, that breath becomes quite audible, actually. And he had heard that. He wanted to work with it. This is so unusual. I so rarely have someone come to say, look, I know I'm going to die, and I'd like to know more about it. And I wonder, can I be aware of it when I'm in it? Like, what would that be? And I hear that it can be really uncomfortable. Are there any, movement practices, or, what could influence pain at the end of life? And so I thought, oh my gosh, this is really something. But who came with him was his daughter. And that's really where the practice was, is that she was dissolved in the fact that he was dying. She didn't want him to die. Of course not. Of course not. And was wanting him to work harder at living, wanting him to find another trial, find something else. Don't give up. Don't give up. And so this is the culture of where we are. And here he was, quite ready, actually, seeing his part in the contract of life and death. And so it was almost as though we just spent time in commiseration with her present of how hard it is to come to this. Of course. And it doesn't mean that you have to, does acceptance mean approval and agreement? No. There's something else here that we can see in a wider way. And she actually began, it was such a beautiful thing to see her begin to, to cry and to soften, and to see what the consequence of her pulling at him was for him, and how it could be different, depending on how she could, practice into this and come to this and become aware of what was in these next weeks. It's just a beautiful thing to see how even at that time things can shift in awareness. And the fear of death that's so strong here is not necessarily a human thing. I think there's good reason for it, and it's not like we're trying to quell that, but it's not true all over the world. So it makes us wonder, okay, so is it true that people are terrified of death all over the world? No, it's not true. So what can we wonder about? What can we learn about? And how can we help people not be terrified? Can they be well accompanied? Can it be, or at least can their fear be spoken? And that's really something that can often not be available, because we're demanding that they be positive and only think good thoughts and don't think about dying. So then they're so lonely in this sense of, I'm in the middle of the night all by myself, and no one will listen to me about this. And no one will allow me to see that my death might have a purpose too.
Yeah. how does this impact you? I mean, to go through with the father and the daughter, it's obviously a lot of your emotional energy. Is it taxing to you? And if so, do you have things that help you kind of build up your inner resources?
Oh, so that's a beautiful wondering. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do wonder sometimes whether, maybe constitutionally we have, a different purpose in the world, or I honestly don't find it taxing. And it could be because I do have a really strong practice with regard to endings, and but I also have a practice when I'm a yoga therapist, which is I do spend a lot of time in preparation when someone's coming. I do spend a lot of time when I'm with someone, attending to my own resources and my breath, and noticing the pull, and afterwards as well. But I also, it's just I think that I'm not troubled by it. I'm not, or I'm willing to walk with my troubledness. I'm willing to walk with my brokenheartedness, to be quite honest. I am brokenhearted. I'm so moved and heartbroken. But I guess I don't make that a problem. I don't make that a thing that I need to fix, as much as for me, yoga is about how can I get wider? How can I be more available to life and to dying as part of life? So yeah, it's intense work, and I'm moved, and I feel really grateful for it, very humbled by it, truly.
You're reminding me of another yogi. Do you know Ellen Fine, who recently passed away?
I don't think I do. Tell me.
So she's a well-known yogini, and she documented her death process for the last few months every day on Facebook. And you could see her starting to lose her stability, and then lose the moisture in her body as she shriveled up. And then you could see the fire kind of, starting to the pale skin, and like up until the last day, every day there was documentation. Here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's going on with me. I was just blown away that she was willing to share that with all of us.
Oh, what an amazing service to all of us. Beautiful seeds of what could be known or could be seen, perhaps in a place where we'd be right beside her. And it sounds very generous.
Yeah, I was like, wow. I think she's onto something. If we could all be that willing to just let it be what it is. I mean, she didn't know what would show up the next day, and she had promised to share, or maybe at that point she could have said, I don't feel like sharing today, but it was very, very generous.
Well, it's if you look across cultures, it's rarely a singular journey. Yeah. And it calls in the community. And it sounds like that's maybe what she was up to there.
I think she had cancer. I'm not sure, but it brings me to this question that you have a brand new book coming out. You did use your life force for the last year or two or three. I'm not sure how long it took. You have a book coming out about cancer and yoga therapy. So tell us about that.
Well, it certainly is a collaborative book. Lee Leibel was my co-editor, co-author, and she's a yoga therapist in New York, and 40 contributors, Amy. 40
Oh,
yoga
my.
therapists in this book speaking about their work in cancer, whether it be in hospitals, in clinics, and studios, across the continuum at the time of diagnosis, in prehab with regard to treatment, in treatment, post treatment, end of life, all of it. And sometimes, those stories continue through that continuum. And so importantly, it really is about what we wanted was to go beyond theory with regard to yoga therapy, and peek into the door with permission to yoga therapists doing their work and the stories of the clients or the patients and what they're coming to, what they're struggling with. Sometimes it is that shock of diagnosis. Sometimes it is, the many things that come in treatment. There's a lot of side effects that we work with, and there's a lot to know about that. And so some of it is really looking at what it is yoga therapists need to know with regard to bone health and lymphedema, et cetera, things that really rise up with regard to the side effects of cancer treatment. Sometimes it's at the end of treatment where, people think, oh, this is just great. I just want to get to the end of the treatment. And that's their focus. And yet when they get to the end of the treatment, other things come, with regard to fear of recurrence, for example, and how do we work with that? And then, of course, there are some who are speaking about working with end of life too. And it's really a remarkable book with regard to integration, because yoga therapy is doing quite well with integration into healthcare in cancer. There's a lot of research with regard to that, and the book does speak to that. And so this is a really beautiful place to consider and to see what yoga can bring to all that comes. Because certainly when someone comes in with cancer, they may be walking in with a great lived experience of trauma or injury, or maybe they have some comorbidities that they're working with. So it's very, very complex. And how do we work amongst ourselves and with these people, but also know who to refer to so that we are in community with oncology, and making sure that we're staying in our good scope of practice and relying on folks that when they're needed. And it's really a beautiful symphony of possibility.
It sounds like it's an important read for every yoga therapist, but I could also imagine a lot of patients who have been diagnosed with cancer might want to read it, just because it's going to give such a thorough explanation about what could or might be likely to happen, and here's what you might be feeling, and here. Do you agree that non-yoga therapists might also love this book?
Oh, for sure. We don't know, hey, when we're diagnosed with something, it's like it's a completely different world. It has a completely different language. And again, there can be such great loneliness if we think we're the only ones who are anxious about a particular treatment, or worried about what this could all mean, or having to find some way of receiving help from others. There's so much that we can bring to it. Yeah, that's really well said.
So we just have a couple of minutes left. Is there anything that is in your heart that you feel we need to talk about or get a message out, or anything that's kind of still there for you?
Well, it does make me think about, we spoke about this a little bit earlier with regard to how can yoga be of help to more? And yes, absolutely, when people are in, a life shattering, of course, but, how can Shavasana actually be of help? What could this be the place that we have some influence on death phobia? Could it be a place that we consider practicing at the end of breath, that we practice an ending of the practice, or bring ourselves to notice an elemental dissolution or something like that. Can we befriend this? And when I say befriend, not like it's challenging. It's not, but is that not part of what we could do for our community? Could we help each other know more and be more available to life itself through befriending death in Shavasana? And, it's funny because, for so many years, there was only Sanskrit in, many, many years ago. And then often in classes, people speak in English, they speak about postures in English. And, there's many things to think about with regard to that. But almost always people will say Shavasana. They will not say corpse pose. And I think, oh my gosh, there's death phobia right in the yoga class. Can we influence this a little bit? Are we willing? And will that allow more availability to the life that we live day to day?
I completely agree. I mean, I'm going to start on Tuesday a class with 35 new college students. And oftentimes when we get to the end of the class, I have this moment of, they're college students. They're in the kinesiology department. They think they're coming here for exercise. And all of a sudden their teacher is going to be saying corpse pose. Like, what will go through their head? Yeah. It's like this fight within me. Like, should I say it? Should I not say it?
Oh, it's so interesting to notice, right? Like you can notice how saying something so true could still be shocking in the room, to say corpse pose or to say my mother died. People are like, whoa, that's a bit of a shock. And that it just helps us to be more aware and to bring more compassion to ourselves and to each other. We're living in a particular time, and there's probably some spirit work of this time that we could come to. And I guess I suppose that this could be part of it.
And I'm so touched that you were willing to go so deeply into this topic. And I feel like I've just gotten barely a taste, and that this conversation will sit with me for some time. I remember at Sitar, the Symposium of Yoga Therapy and Research, 2 or 3 years ago, I did a seminar with you on death and dying. And at the end of it, you had us in Shavasana, imagining our death and allowing the 5 elements to leave our body one at a time. And that's been a profound experience for me. Like, I think of it often. So I can only imagine this year-long course. Can you just tell us a tiny bit more? Like, is that once a week or what?
You such a look of trepidation. You're like,
I know. I'm really. This is an area I'm going to be completely vulnerable and admit. Like, I think especially because my mother died unexpectedly. Yeah. I just feel like, do I even have the bandwidth to do something like that?
Well, I mean, I think that you'd be with people who imagine that they don't have the bandwidth, because I mean, where does bandwidth come from? But luckily it's a gentle, titrated possibility of meeting once a month. And then, and as we do, noticing our resistance, noticing our no, noticing our, I can't do it. But in good company. So that we can just wonder about it together for 12 months and imagine, as you did, as you do with, if it's true that I'm mortal, how will I proceed? What will I come to today? And it is a changer, because it is quite countercultural to do such a thing. So I'll give you that.
And when you say once a month, does that mean one weekend, one day?
No. It really is one meeting of about, depending on who's in the room, a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, and then you retreat. You go back to your life and you say, how is this in my life? How could it be that I might come closer to this? Or I'm just noticing the whole month, no, I can't do it. I'm in such okay, so let's talk about the resistance. What is it? What do you notice in your body in this resistance? What do you notice in your breath? And it really is, I suppose, unwinding what we've been living together, and how we might use or employ yoga and the many practices that come from yoga that help us to work with, our fears and our human unwillingness to look at things sometimes. And that's okay. That's okay. It's not an assistance, and that's nice. It's not a must do, but sometimes we go through many months of can't do it together.
So would we find out about that course on your website if one of us might be interested in doing this with you? Not committing, but I'm pondering.
Yes. What's happening in your body, Amy, as you're wondering?
Honestly, it's interesting. When I just said that, I felt like this, I actually, after I said it, I felt much more relaxed and softened than before I said it, which is interesting. Sometimes your mind has a resistance, but your body's like, no, you probably should do this, Wheeler.
Yeah. Notice that leaning forward possibility. Yeah. Yes, it is on the website. It is on the website. And I would welcome anyone who thinks that it's not a good idea.
Well, you'll be in good company with Amy. Everyone who thinks they don't have the bandwidth for us, come on over. But what is your website, Anne?
It is annepitman.ca.
ANNEPITMAN.ca for Canada.
Yeah, that's it. And, before we leave, I want to just bring some flowers. I wish I could bring flowers to you, actually, truly. But imagine I am bringing these flowers to you and placing them at your feet for all of your work in the world. It's so gorgeous what you do, and your willingness to bring a real cultivated curiosity to these talks that you have with people, and a real kindness, and your willingness to bring other people's work to the fore. I'm amazed by you. And I hope it's true that we'll be together again someday. But, if not, I want you to know I think about you. I keep you in mind in my days, especially in the Zoom days, because I know that you have some real regard for working through Zoom that I'm learning from you. Of course, we bring you to our school that you can speak to all of this too, and your real discernment with regard to co-assessment. And so thank you for everything that you bring.
Thank you, Anne. It's maybe strange to say, but this podcast is the one area of my life where I've decided that I will never abandon myself. I will always check in with myself and stay true. And I won't be a people pleaser. And I'm not going to shift what I want, which is to bring more humanity into the world. And so even in inviting guests, it's not that there are amazing people out there doing amazing work, but if I don't feel 100% in my heart that I want to connect deeply with a person, I can't do it. And I'm really staying with that. And I think that's informed by considering death. Like what's something that when I'm on my deathbed, I can say, I did that as well as I could with my whole heart, and I didn't abandon myself. And this might be the singular thing in my life that I'll be able to say that about.
Well, it just brings such a depth of humanity to your work and to this podcast, that so many of us are listening to and finding tremendous support in. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this interview with Ann Pittman. And I think we also need to mention Cassie Kittner, who is the co-director of the yoga therapy school that they run together. They're both amazing, beautiful women. And I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned Cassie for all the great work that she does in the world. And this interview has left me with a feeling of uncertainty, a little bit of feeling uncomfortable, some wonder, some trepidation, some questioning if I have the bandwidth, as we said earlier, to move into this space. And I think because of the way that Anne works with titration, with going in and feeling and then bringing it into the body and then backing out and creating space and then allowing yourself to listen deeply to your own needs and flow back and forth between the state of attention versus relaxation. I think this is the way that I would like to explore death and dying in a very gentle, peaceful way with not a lot of expectations and dogma and rigidity. As Anne said so many times, just kind of making the space bigger and bigger and bigger, like, taking the lens out instead of getting so focused and specific. And so I feel somatically in my body like, yeah, this is something I could do. And I think, especially with her course being offered online, that not having to travel to Ottawa once a month for a year, it just makes it easier for me. So I'm really leaning into this idea. I hope you are too. If you're listening, maybe this is the right time for you to go deeply. And I was talking to Anne for a few minutes after we finished the interview. And I think just being in COVID times has already done some of the work in this area for us. Last night, I was telling her my husband and I had spaghetti, and I had had spaghetti for years. And I was just delighted with the taste, the texture, the serotonin high from the spaghetti. And then this morning, my husband knew that I had this interview early in the morning. So I went down and there was fresh chai, and he had placed my pink coffee cup with the most wonderful creamer, Chobani creamer, hazelnut, next to the coffee cup. And I just felt so cherished by him. And I just found him and gave him a big hug and said, thank you for making my morning easier. And this is how I want to live. I want to really enjoy the carbohydrate high of the spaghetti and the chai the next morning and the walk in nature with my dogs. I think slowing down and being with and traveling less. I personally love Zoom because I feel like I can attend to my own life. And as Anne put it in our post-interview talk, cultivate the home that I want to have, keep my body in balance, keep my mind in balance. I'm all for online Zoom learning because I think so many of us yogis get running around frantically, trying to make money, trying to be famous, trying to be seen, we actually lose the essence of yoga. And that is to attend to each moment, to each sacred moment with awe and with wonder. And as Anne taught us today, really thinking about our own death, planning for our death, knowing that it's inevitable, and allowing that to kind of inform our life is really the way that we want to go. So we, as you know, in 2022, we are going to start giving a little gift each week to our listeners, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But for now, I just say thank you to Anne, and I hope that this interview has been nourishing to you, given you food for thought, and possibly made you open to the idea of contemplating death and dying for yourself and for your loved ones in a way that is not overwhelming or depressing, but rather full of spaciousness and wonder and willingness to just see what's there, and knowing that you can soften or back out at any time. There's no timeline for this. So thank you. We'd like to thank you for being our listener. Each week, we'd like to give you a gift of an infographic that has something to do with the topic that we've just finished talking about. So if you go to the show notes and sign up below, you can have all the infographics sent to you weekly. Thank you for listening to our show today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share the episode with a friend or colleague. We're so grateful you're willing to share. Also, you could write us a review on most major platforms that host podcasts. Give us 5 stars if you appreciate the show and tell us what you love so that we can do more of that. Finally, we support several nonprofit organizations through this podcast. See the show notes to understand how you can help. If you'd like to be a guest or a sponsor for this program, contact us at the email welcome@theoptimalstate.com. welcome@theoptimalstate.com. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.